Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's Connect Group Bible Study. I'm here with Abel.
Hello.
Who has just preached a great sermon on Matthew 20, verses 20 to 28. We were trying to come up with a name. Where did you start? What was your first?
Well, basically, I started with the exciting and sexy title of The Call to Leadership.
Which is really dull, isn't it?
And then Dan had an idea.
Oh yeah, I had the idea of two clowns and a tiger mum. Which as you'll see, is kind of in the passage. But I think where you've landed is a lot better.
We've landed in the middle path. Leading when you're not in charge. That's sort of the working title that we have.
Yeah, but I've got emoticons for mine, so there's no clown one there. But
okay, you win.
So leading when you're not in charge.
Yeah.
Okay, but as always, read the passage out aloud. If you can, have it open in front of you, pen in hand, as you're going along. Any questions you have, stick them down. And as we say always, like no question is out of bounds. And what you're about to see is the disciples ask possibly one of the stupidest questions you could ever ask, and it just generates some of the most amazing fruit from Jesus ever possible. So don't be afraid of putting any question. No questions too rude, silly, or
except for how much is your rent. That's not within bounds.
That's a bit awkward.
Yeah.
Don't ask that. And exclamation mark for anything that just stands out for you, and an arrow for anything that can apply to your life. And we're going to be finishing this by really saying that this is really key and this lands in our everyday life. So be looking out for that stuff as well. So have a read and then come back and we're going to have a look through together. Okay, so Abel, tell us a bit about the sort of the backstory or the scenario here, because we've got this woman, the mother of Zebedee. Who's this woman and what's her beef?
Really? Basically, first century tiger mom. Her name is Salome, and she's the mother of James and John. And tradition tells us that she was also the sister to Mary, which makes her the auntie to Jesus, and James and John the cousins to Jesus. And we're told that basically, right after Jesus predicts his death, in a matter of a week, their reaction is, okay, you're about to die, Jesus. Can we have the best places in your kingdom?
So it's like he says, he takes them to one side. It's like a really intimate moment. He's like, this is going to happen to me. It's going to be awful, going to be crucified. And they're like, can we have your seat?
Yeah.
Okay, can we have your job?
Yeah.
That's pretty insensitive, isn't it?
You have cancer. Can I have PlayStation? Your PlayStation when you go?
That was one commentator's take on this, wasn't it? Like, yeah.
That's the modern day equivalent.
Somebody else said, we're all too eager to take Jesus' seat as Lord, which I think is a good place to start, really. So what happens?
So then she asks Jesus, kneeling down, which is an interesting thing, because to her credit, she comes in a worshipful position. And she asks Jesus to give her sons the right and left seats of the kingdom, basically the two top positions after the king. And then Jesus responds that you don't know what you're asking. And he says a very interesting thing. He asks, can you drink the cup I'm about to drink? And at this point, it's very clear that James and John have no idea what he's talking about.
He's just described it for them, just to put this in context. It's like, hand it over to the chief priests, condemn him to death, hand him over to Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. He's kind of implying that this is the cup, right? But it's over their heads.
Yeah. They only heard about the kingdom, like this idea that they might be promoted. So he asks, can you drink the cup I'm about to drink? And this cup that he's talking about is the cup of suffering that, on the night before he is crucified, he wrestles with. And it's this incredible moment in the Garden of the Gethsemane where Jesus, and it's almost scandalous because Jesus says to the Father, can you remove this from me? And then very quickly says, but not my will, but your will be done. And it's this moment of incredible obedience that sets us up to why Jesus is the ultimate leader, because he's the best follower there is. It's the same cup that he's talking about. So he asked James and John whether they even know what they're talking about. Can you drink this cup that I'm about to drink? And they say, we can.
But they can't.
No, they can't, because exactly at the moment that Jesus was praying at the Garden of Gethsemane, what are they doing but falling asleep?
Now, amazingly, he says, you will indeed drink from my cup. And there's sort of church tradition says that they are, one is martyred and one is not in different ways, right?
Yeah, very interesting that the cups of suffering that they do indeed have later on in their lives is true. James I think tradition tells us was the first martyr among the disciples. And then John, we know, was exiled. So he wasn't necessarily martyred, but he lived till an old age in exile.
And so the first sort of idea that you drew out is that we get a picture of the essence of leadership here, don't we?
Yeah, that leadership is not a position, but a posture. So the idea here is that Jesus basically helps us to unlearn some ideas about leadership. And he in his upside down kingdom, he basically talks about leadership in a very different way from the way that the world defines leadership. And I sort of trace it back to the effects of the fall, when at the fall, what was good about creation was corrupted. The gifts of money, sex, and power were corrupted and contaminated. And leadership was not exempt from this corruption as well. And so what Jesus does as he sets up this upside down kingdom is to make leadership right again. Leadership is his idea, except leadership is not a position of a rank, but the posture of a heart. And he begins to explain what that means for us.
And it's interesting because she, as you say, she's kneeling down. She's got the outward posture right, but the inward posture is not. And that can be us so often.
Yeah.
But often as well, we see it done really well. We're really fortunate here to have amazing Christians who are older than us, ahead of us in the journey. And so we thought as a first good question, we're wondering, let's have a bit of a celebration, really. Where have you seen leadership as a posture over a position displayed? Where have you seen servant leadership demonstrated in your life, and what's the benefit it's had for you? Yeah, so have a discussion around that.
Yeah.
We'll see you back in a minute. Okay, so leadership is not a position, but it's a posture. But also you then said there's a focus in leadership as well that we see in this passage.
Yeah, the second false idea that Jesus begins to break almost to help us to unlearn is that it's not about rights, but about responsibility. And here, I think it's the idea that Jesus says, if you want to be first, you have to be a slave. If you want to be the greatest, you have to be a servant. First, you have to be a slave. And it's almost like a bit of a rhyme. There's something poetic going on here. But really, I think the idea that Jesus is trying to introduce to us is that servants and slaves are concerned about responsibility, not about rights. And they are two very different things. Rights are concerned about what you should get, but responsibility is concerned about what you can give. And while this is a helpful comparison, it's also helpful to know that actually rights are not bad either. There are occasions when actually being aware of rights is helpful, and it's also very helpful to know that Jesus is not talking about the kind of servanthood that comes from oppression. Because modern day slavery is still a sin. It's still something to use our leadership to fight. But he was really talking about a new kind of servanthood that came from freedom. And this was the freedom to prefer others over ourselves.
If you want to explore that more, Tom Holland has just released a book called Dominion that really explores how the idea of human rights flows out of our belief that we are created in the image of God. And sort of it's this emptying of saying that I'm going to lay down my rights to love other people, which is what Jesus is getting here. And really he's talking into this because they're annoyed, aren't they? The basically the other disciples are annoyed. They're indignant because they're possibly British, and probably not in other translations. But not because they're like, that's rude. They're probably thinking, rats, they called it.
Yeah.
And under the cooling rules, they did it. Oh man, those seats are theirs. Like if you leave a chair for 3 seconds, right? 3 second rule, it's theirs. So they're annoyed. And then he's like, right, team vision talk. It's just that it's so powerful, isn't it? Not so with you. Not so with you. That should be a mantra for us, right?
Yeah, he makes a distinction that, the Gentiles lord it over themselves. You've seen how leadership looks like, power looks like a certain way in the Roman Empire. But then he turns to his disciples in this small powwow and he says, not so with you.
Well, and I love it as well because he's not saying that this doesn't work. He's not saying that people don't do this. He just says, not with you. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, everyone else in your workplace can lead that way, but it's your job to work out what this looks like to lead in a different way. Not to not lead, not to abdicate your responsibility, but to not so with you.
Yeah.
What's he offering you instead?
Yeah. And Jesus was not negating leadership. Sometimes we can read a passage like this and think, okay, yeah, so let's not be leaders then. Let's just be slaves and servants. But really, Jesus was redefining leadership again to help us to see.
He's talking about becoming great. He's like, who wants to become great amongst you? Like, it's fine to be ambitious in love and service and dream bigger. Like, their mum had vision for their lives.
Yes.
Like, they probably should have had bigger vision. Like, ask for yourself, guys. Like,
And when you look at the pages of history, then it's interesting to see how actually it took servant-hearted leaders to abolish slavery, right? So there's this irony here about some of the greatest, most powerful and effective leaders have led from a place of a posture of serving. They use their influence in powerful ways, more powerful than even positional authority could have afforded them this impact.
And I loved your line. It said leadership is more about carrying a ladder for others than climbing up it yourself, which I think is brilliant. And I think that leads into our next question is, where are you leading without position? So in your job, you might have a position and you need to lead there. But there'll be other places where you don't have a position, you don't have a title, but actually in Christ, you are called to lead in that place. So where are some of those? So some of that might be where you have informal influence over friends or other family members, like nephews and nieces, or everything I'm thinking now has a title, like godparent. But there are places where you have influence where you don't yet have a responsibility necessarily. Nobody would look at you and go, why aren't you doing that necessarily? But Christ might be calling you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe a place that you're leading without a title, or maybe your title doesn't quite match the leadership that is required of you. So maybe you do have a title, but it's not quite as big as the leadership that you're providing.
Yeah, have a chat around that, and see you back in a moment. Okay, so just to recap, you said the essence of leadership is that leadership is not a position, but a posture. You said the focus is not about rights, but about responsibility. The last thing that Jesus sort of wants to break in us is this, the source of it. So where it starts and what sustains it.
Yeah, so true leadership comes not through principles, but through a person. And this is, I think, the sort of make or break lesson about leadership. Because if we just think of leadership as a set of principles, then we can just go away with, great principles to try to implement. But you're only as powerful as what you have, and you can't give what you don't have yet. And how many times have we tried to aim high at, big values and principles and then failed miserably? It's really because we've needed the source of the Holy Spirit, and Jesus is the person who empowers us to live out these values in the first place. And so the source of leadership is a person, and it's a person who loves us, Jesus.
And the wonderful thing is, it says here, he came to give his life as a ransom for many. So before we do this for others, we have to receive that he has done this for ourselves, which is quite a humbling thing. We needed to be saved. We needed to be ransomed. And that word there is, you don't ransom successful people. Well, unless they've been kidnapped. But again, they're then in a place not of power. You ransom people who are at the bottom of the pile, who are under other people's piles. It's the word used for buying a slave back. In Psalm 103, it says he ransoms our life from the pit. He doesn't buy you when you're doing really well, number one on the podium. It's when you're at your worst, when you've got nothing to offer, when there's nothing you can do to save yourself. That's the moment he buys you, and he gives you. And unless you receive that for yourself first, you can't give it away to others. But you also had something as well about, what was it you said about obedience to... We're not called in obedience primarily to a principle.
To principles, yeah. But we're called to obedience to a person who himself was obedient to the Father. And we see here, Jesus has the highest street cred for being a leader, because he was the best follower there was. He said, I only do what the Father tells me to do. And there's this principle here about leadership where you command as much respect as you respect command. And Jesus, because he was the perfect follower, the most obedient follower there was to the Father, he is therefore qualified as the most qualified leader. And we are obedient not to principles but to a person, and that person happens to be the most obedient person as well.
Which means it stops it from becoming self-improvement, stops it coming from self-reliance. There's just that wonderful idea that, I mean, it's not the principles are bad. Like Jesus spends time teaching. Here he's teaching, he's giving them some things, but all of his principles center around himself.
Yeah.
In other words, he's saying, come to me. I loved your line. He's not just our role model, he's our ransom.
Yeah.
That he comes and he buys us and he gives us everything, starts everything and then gives us everything we need.
And that is basically the story of humanity as well. The good news is that the grand narrative of the world does not end with the fall, but with the restoration of creation, because Christ wasn't just a role model, but a ransom for us. And therefore we are justified by Christ before the Father.
So for the last question, and then to pray for each other, is the key thing with all this stuff is it lands in real life. Like the most pressing question for this group of people in that time of day is, what do we do with the Romans? Like these external people have come in, destroyed our way of life, our religion, imposing themselves on us. How are we supposed to respond? Like it can't get more political, more real, more grounded than that.
Vote Brexit. That's what you do.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe.
Okay,
Who knows?
Cut that
Who
out
knows
now.
though? Who knows? We're not going to cut it. We'll leave it. Very few of us will be voting. No more voting. I'm distracted now. But the idea is this isn't just about sort of spiritual practices for you at home. This is about what you do as you look after your kids, as you relate to your friends, as you lead in the workplace, as you serve in the workplace. And so this is the question. We're trying to work this out for ourselves. What is the most pressing issue or circumstance that you're facing that this directly addresses? And then once you've worked that out, therefore, what do you need from Jesus? Like work out your need and then let that drive you into Jesus's presence and dependence on him. So I was trying to work out, I think one of the things I struggle with is when I'm looking after our kids, I can think, I'm not being productive and I want to learn something, and I just have to go, no, I'm just going to sit under and I'm going to let go of the need to produce anything and just enjoy parenting and investing in my kids in a way that doesn't produce anything in that moment. And that's a sort of taking off my idea of a successful day being I've produced something, and be actually, no, I just need to sit under and just be with my family.
Yeah, and I was thinking about just how growing up in the Asian background where you almost have to earn everything, including love. Life is a little bit of a competition, and there's always this fear of failure following you everywhere. And for me, the only true freedom from that is knowing that actually the prize has already been won, because I am loved. And to start from that place of knowing that I am loved basically almost liberates me from needing to seek validation or to fear failure. So that's the thought that I had.
So in that way, you're not going power over. Here's what I've achieved. Have a good day. You're starting with, I'm ransomed. I'm loved. I'm receiving anything before I've done anything.
Yeah,
that's that sort of play of this.
There's no more races to run because the prize has been won. It's done. And for any
Abel's breaking out the Penty here.
That's it.
Okay, so discuss that issue and then that question, and then as you work out, then pray for each other to receive what you need from Jesus to see this change brought about. Have a great week. God bless, and see you on Sunday.
Have a good one.